5,000 years ago, the world was reborn. 8 souls stepped off the ark onto a mountain peak, and the future of humanity hung in the balance. You know Noah, the builder who saved the world. You know Shem, the preserver who kept the flame. You know Ham, the youngest who saw too much. But you do not know the son who would give birth to continents. His name was Japheth. While Shem maintained the center and Ham built the cities, Japheth expanded the edges. From his bloodline came the Greeks and the Romans, the Celts and the Germans, the Slavs and the Scythians, the Indians and the Chinese, the peoples who would circle the globe and build civilizations that touched every shore. This is the untold story of the firstborn son of Noah. The ancestor of Europe and Asia, the father of the Gentiles, the one who received the blessing of enlargement and the promise of dwelling in his brother's tents. Stay until the end because the revelation about what Japheth's expansion actually means for the modern world will challenge every assumption you have ever made about borders, about belonging, and about the God who makes room for all who seek him. Japheth was the oldest son of Noah. In the ancient world, this position carried expectation. The firstborn inherited the authority, the blessing, the double portion. But Japheth stepped off the ark into a world where the old rules had been washed away. The ground was still wet. The cities were gone. The nations were unborn. And in this emptiness, Japheth had to discover what his birthright meant. He was not like Shem, content to listen and remember. He was not like Ham, driven to see and explore. Japheth planned. He looked at the horizon and calculated distances. He studied the wind and the currents. He asked his father about the geography of the world before the flood, about the mountains and the valleys. About the paths that water had carved through stone. Noah answered as best he could. But Noah had never traveled. He had built the ark in one place, survived in one place, landed in one place. Japheth wanted more. He wanted to see what remained of the world. He wanted to find where the water had receded and what had survived. He wanted to map the emptiness and fill it with life. This was his gift. The ability to expand without losing direction. To explore without forgetting home. To grow beyond the familiar while maintaining connection to the source. When Noah gathered his sons to speak the words that would shape their futures, Japheth heard the blessing he had been born to receive. May God enlarge Japheth. The words were simple but infinite. Enlargement meant territory. Enlargement meant descendants. Enlargement meant the spreading of influence across every barrier that had confined humanity before the flood. But there was more. May he dwell in the tents of Shem. The expansion was not separate from the covenant. It was sheltered by it. The enlarged would find their home within the preserved. The explorer would return to the listener. The firstborn would honor the middle. This was Japheth's calling. Not to replace Shem but to surround him. Not to compete with the covenant but to carry it to the ends of the earth. Japheth had 7 sons, and from them came the peoples who would fill the islands and the coastlands, the mountains and the plains, the northern and eastern reaches of the ancient world. Gomer went to the northwest, to the lands that would become Anatolia and Europe, father of the Ashkenaz and the Riphatites and the Togarma, ancestors of the Celts and the Germans and the peoples of the steppes. Magog went to the northeast, to the territories of the Scythians and the later barbarians who would press against the empires of civilization. Madai became the father of the Medes, the peoples of the Iranian plateau who would build kingdoms and influence history from the east. Javan went to the southwest. To the islands of the Mediterranean, father of the Elisha and the Tarshish, the Kittim and the Rhodanim, the ancestors of the Greeks who would give philosophy and art and democracy to the world. Tubal and Meshech settled in the regions between, the Caucasus and Asia Minor, the sources of metals and trade and the military technologies that would arm ancient armies. Tiras became the father of the maritime peoples, the seafarers and merchants who would connect the coasts and carry goods across the waters. These were Japheth's children. They were not unified. They did not build a single empire or speak a single language. They scattered. They diversified. They adapted to mountains and islands, to forests and steppes, to climates that ranged from frozen tundra to tropical shore. This was the genius of Japheth's line. Not concentration but dispersion. Not centralization but distribution. The ability to thrive in variety, to develop distinct cultures while maintaining common ancestry, to become many while remaining one. The Bible says that from Japheth came the peoples who would occupy the isles of the Gentiles. This phrase carried meaning. The isles were the edges, the boundaries, the places beyond the center. The Gentiles were the nations, the peoples who were not Israel, who did not know the God of Shem by name but who would one day seek him. Japheth's descendants were destined for these edges. They would settle the islands of the Mediterranean and the coasts of Europe. They would push into the Atlantic and the North Sea. They would find their way to the British Isles and the Scandinavian fjords, to the Baltic shores and the Russian rivers. And they would not stop at the water's edge. They would build ships. They would learn the winds. They would become the great seafarers of ancient and modern history, the Phoenicians and the Greeks, the Vikings and the Portuguese, the Dutch and the English, the peoples who would circle the globe and connect the continents. This maritime gift came from Japheth. The comfort with water, the skill with vessels, the willingness to risk the horizon. Noah had built one ark to survive the flood. His descendants would build thousands of ships to explore the world it left behind. The Isles of the Gentiles were not a prison. They were a platform. A place to develop the technologies and the courage that would eventually reach every shore. And from these isles, the influence would flow back to the center. The philosophy of Greece would shape the theology of Jerusalem. The law of Rome would protect the Church of Christ. The science of Europe would illuminate the scriptures of Moses. Japheth's expansion was not an escape from Shem's covenant. It was the preparation for its global fulfillment. From Javan came the Greeks, and from the Greeks came the foundation of Western civilization. This was Japheth's gift to the world, the development of reason, the celebration of beauty, the exploration of the human form and the human mind. The Greeks asked questions that others had not thought to ask. They looked at the stars and sought explanations beyond myth. They looked at the state and sought systems beyond tyranny. They looked at the body and sought proportions beyond function. Philosophy was born in their agoras. Democracy was invented in their assemblies. Theater was created in their amphitheaters. The Olympic Games celebrated human excellence. The Iliad and the Odyssey preserved human memory in forms that would never be surpassed. And yet the Greeks were not isolated. They were connected to the older world. They traded with the Phoenicians who carried goods from Shem's descendants. They studied in Egypt where Ham's descendants had built their monuments. They absorbed and transformed, taking the knowledge of the ancient Near East and giving it new forms, new questions, new possibilities. This was Japheth's method. Not rejection but transformation. Not isolation but engagement. The ability to take what existed and expand it, to add dimensions that had not been imagined, to build on foundations without being limited by them. When Alexander the Great conquered the known world, he was acting out Japheth's destiny. When he spread Greek culture from Egypt to India, he was expanding the tents of Shem to dimensions that Shem's own descendants had not achieved. And when Rome rose and absorbed Greece and spread its law and its peace across the Mediterranean and beyond, it was continuing Japheth's work, building the infrastructure that would one day carry the gospel to the ends of the earth. Rome was not descended from Japheth in the same direct line as Greece. But Rome was part of the Japhethic expansion, the wave of peoples from the north and west who would reshape the ancient world. The Romans brought what the Greeks had not: organization, administration, engineering on a massive scale. They built roads that still survive. They constructed aqueducts that still function. They established a legal system that still influences courts. They created a peace, the Pax Romana, that allowed travel and trade across territories that had never been unified. This infrastructure was essential. Without the roads, the apostles could not have traveled. Without the common language of Greek and the common law of Rome, The gospel could not have been communicated. Without the relative safety of the empire, the church could not have spread. Japheth's descendants had built the vessel that would carry Shem's covenant to the world. Paul could travel from Jerusalem to Rome because Roman roads made it possible. The epistles could be read across the Mediterranean because Roman peace made it safe. The church could establish communities in every major city because Roman administration made it feasible. This was the fulfillment of Noah's words. Japheth would dwell in the tents of Shem. The expanded would find their home in the preserved. The empire would serve the church. The Gentile would carry the Jew. The firstborn would honor the middle. And the God of Shem would become the God of Japheth, not by replacement but by inclusion, not by conquest but by adoption. While Greece and Rome dominated the Mediterranean, the other sons of Japheth were moving across the northern and eastern territories. Gomer's descendants, the Celts and Germans and Slavs, were spreading through the forests and plains of Europe. They developed their own cultures, their own languages, their own forms of worship and war. They were not civilized in the Mediterranean sense. They did not build cities or write philosophy. But they possessed strengths that the southern peoples had lost. They were hardy, adaptable, capable of surviving in climates that would have killed more refined populations. They were warriors, skilled in the use of iron and the tactics of forest and field. They were independent, resistant to the centralization that empires demanded. And they were waiting. For centuries, the northern peoples were the threat on the edge of civilization, the barbarians who would one day overwhelm Rome. But they were also the reservoir of future possibility. When the empire fell, it was the northern peoples who would rebuild. The Franks and the Goths, the Angles and the Saxons, the Lombards and the Vandals, they would establish the kingdoms that would become Europe. They would convert to Christianity and carry the faith to new territories. They would develop the technologies and the institutions that would eventually produce the modern world. The Industrial Revolution would come from their descendants. The scientific method would be refined by their scholars. The democratic ideals would be implemented by their revolutionaries. Japheth's northern line, the peoples of the isles and the forests, would prove to be the carriers of expansion beyond anything the ancient world had imagined. Japheth's line was not limited to the west. Madai became the father of the Medes, and from the Medes and their cousins the Persians came the eastern empires that would rival and surpass the west. Cyrus the Great established a realm that stretched from India to the Mediterranean, the largest empire the world had yet seen. He allowed the Jews to return from exile, the only Gentile king to be called the Anointed of the Lord. The Persian Empire was Japhethic in its diversity, its tolerance, its ability to rule many peoples without forcing uniformity. This was the Eastern expression of enlargement, the capacity to expand without destroying, to include without assimilating. Further east, the descendants of Japheth would influence the development of India and even China. The Indo-European language family, which includes Sanskrit and Greek, Latin and German, Persian and Hindi, comes from Japheth's line. The peoples who would populate the subcontinent and develop the Vedic traditions, who would build the Mauryan and Gupta empires, who would create the mathematics and the astronomy that would later be transmitted to the West, they carried Japhethic ancestry. The connection is distant, complex, debated by scholars. But the pattern is clear. Japheth's blessing of enlargement was not limited to one direction. It spread across the continents, influencing developments that would eventually connect in ways that no single generation could have predicted. The Silk Road, the trade route that linked China to Rome, was a Japhethic achievement, the result of expansion on both ends that created a bridge across the world. But the center of Japheth's story is not the expansion. It is the dwelling. May he dwell in the tents of Shem. This was the condition, the purpose, the meaning of the enlargement. Japheth was not blessed to replace his brother. He was blessed to surround him, to protect him, to carry his influence beyond the boundaries that Shem's own descendants might not cross. The history of the world can be read as the working out of this promise. The Greeks learned from the Hebrews. The Romans protected the Jews. The Christian Church, born from Jewish roots, carried the scriptures to the Gentile world. The Reformation returned to Hebrew sources. The modern state of Israel is supported by nations descended from Japheth. The pattern is not always visible. It is not always acknowledged. There are centuries of conflict, of persecution, of the very opposite of dwelling together. But the underlying structure remains. Japheth finds his home in Shem's tents. The expanded discovers that it needs the preserved. The explorer returns to the listener. The firstborn honors the middle. This is the mystery of Japheth's blessing. It is not independent. It is relational. The enlargement only makes sense in reference to the center. The dispersion only finds meaning in connection to the source. Japheth's descendants have built the most powerful civilizations in history. But those civilizations, at their best moments, have been the ones that made room for Shem, that protected the covenant, that carried the God of Israel to the ends of the earth. Today, the descendants of Japheth dominate the global landscape. The nations of Europe and Asia, of America and Australia, they are Japhethic in ancestry and influence. The languages that unify the world, the technologies that connect it, the institutions that govern it, they come from Japheth's line. But this dominance is not the fulfillment of the blessing. It is the opportunity for it. The modern world faces a crisis of meaning. The expansion has happened. The enlargement is complete. The globe is covered. But the dwelling is threatened. The tents of Shem are under pressure. The covenant is questioned. The center is neglected. The challenge for Japheth's descendants today is not to expand further but to dwell better. To use the enlargement that has been given to protect and preserve what has been entrusted. To recognize that the God of Shem is the God of Japheth too, and that the separation between them was never meant to be permanent. The church, in its best moments, has been the place where Japheth dwells in Shem's tents. The missionary movement, the translation of scripture, the support of Israel, the protection of religious liberty, these have been the expressions of Japheth's blessing properly understood. But there have also been betrayals, persecutions, the Holocaust, the replacement theologies that claimed the church had replaced Israel. These have been the failures to dwell, the refusals to honor, the betrayals of the blessing itself. The question for the modern world is whether Japheth will remember his calling. Whether the enlarged will find their home in the preserved. Whether the explorer will return to the listener. Whether the firstborn will honor the middle. But here is what they never tell you. Here is the revelation that changes everything. Japheth's expansion was never meant to end in Japheth. It was meant to create room. Room for the God of Shem to be known by all. Room for the covenant to extend beyond its original boundaries. Room for the blessing of Abraham to reach the nations that Abraham's own descendants would never touch. The God of Shem is not a tribal deity. He is the creator of all. And Japheth's enlargement was the preparation of a vessel large enough to carry that truth to the world. When Paul stood in Athens and quoted Greek poets to explain the unknown God, he was dwelling in Shem's tents through Japheth's wisdom. When the Bible was translated into Latin and German and English and Chinese, it was Japheth's languages carrying Shem's covenant. When missionaries sailed to Africa and Asia and the Pacific, it was Japheth's ships and Japheth's courage extending the dwelling to the ends of the earth. The question for you is not whether you are descended from Japheth or Shem or Ham. The question is whether you will dwell. Whether you will make room for the other. Whether you will use your expansion to protect and preserve rather than to conquer and replace. The waters have not stopped rising. Not the flood of Noah but the flood of globalization, of migration, of cultural collision. The isles of the Gentiles are no longer separated by water. They are connected by technology and travel and trade. The expansion is complete. The dwelling must begin. And somewhere, in the quiet of an ordinary afternoon, a voice is speaking to someone who will listen. Enlarge. But dwell. Expand. But protect. Grow. But honor. Will that someone be you? The God of Shem is waiting. But he is also the God of Japheth. And the tent is large enough for all who will enter. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of 5,000 years of expansion pressing against your chest, then you need to act before the opportunity closes. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications, because we are building a community of dwelling, of protection, of modern-day Japheths who choose to expand their tents to make room for others. Comment the word dwell below if you are committed to using your enlargement to shelter rather than to exclude. Share this video with one person who needs to know that expansion without dwelling is empty and that the God of Shem makes room for all. The time to dwell is before the expansion collapses, not after. The time to make room is while there is still space. Act now. Japheth expanded the world. But he also learned to come home. He became the bridge between the edge and the center, between the explorer and the listener, between the enlarged and the preserved. His hands were scarred from building ships and from constructing tents large enough for others. His eyes had seen the horizon but also learned to see the value of the hearth. He was not perfect. He was persistent. And in the end, persistence is the only perfection that matters. The waters have not stopped rising. The expansion continues. The isles of the Gentiles are connected as never before. And somewhere, in the quiet of an ordinary afternoon, a voice is speaking to someone who will listen. Enlarge. Dwell. Protect. Will that someone be you? The God of Shem is still the God of those who dwell. But he is also the God of Japheth. And the tent is open for all who will enter.